The day I walked into my own mother's gallery opening and heard her introduce me as just someone who helped with the lighting, I understood something I'd been refusing to accept for years. I wasn't invisible by accident, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the part that came before. The part I kept quiet about for almost 8 months. The part that made that night in the gallery the moment everything finally cracked open. My name is Tessa. I'm 31 years old. I'm a licensed architect, and I am the reason the Halverson Cultural Center in Millhaven is still standing the way it was designed. Not the way my brother would have built it, which is to say, wrong. My family has always orbited around my brother. His name is Rowan. He's 3 years older than me, and from the time we were kids, the story in our house was simple. Rowan was the one with vision. I was the one who was good at math. My mother is an artist. She runs a gallery downtown, Morrow & Co., named after our grandmother. She has a talent for making everything look intentional, including favoritism. She would say she loves us both equally, and she would believe it while she was saying it. That's the most frustrating part. She doesn't know she's doing it. She just looks at Rowan and sees possibility, and looks at me and sees capability, and somewhere in her mind, those are not the same thing. My father retired from construction management about 6 years ago. He built things his whole life, and he passed that instinct to Rowan, who went into real estate development. The difference between them is that my father was good at it. Rowan is good at talking about it. I became an architect because I loved what buildings could do. The way light moved through a well-placed window. The way a hallway could feel either like a burden or a breath, depending on its width. I worked hard for my license. I passed my exams on the first try. I joined a mid-size firm in Millhaven called Driscoll Plus Park, and for the past 4 years I've been doing the work I always wanted to do. None of that was ever the conversation at Sunday dinners. The conversation was always Rowan's latest project, Rowan's latest deal, who Rowan had lunch with and what it might lead to. I stopped going to Sunday dinners about 2 years ago. I told my mother I was too busy. She said she understood. She said it the way people say things they don't want to examine too closely. The Halverson project came to Driscoll Plus Park in the spring. The Halverson family wanted to build a cultural center, a mixed-use space for art exhibitions, small performances, community events. The building would sit on a corner lot in downtown Millhaven that had been empty since a warehouse fire 10 years ago. The city cared about it. There was public funding involved. There were historic preservation requirements because the adjacent buildings had protected facades. My supervisor, a woman named Elise, put me on the project. She said she thought I was ready for something with more complexity. She was right, and I knew it, and I spent the first 2 weeks doing nothing but studying the site. What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing at first, was that Rowan was involved. He'd gotten there through the Halverson family's second son, who Rowan knew from a real estate networking group. Rowan had apparently positioned himself as a development consultant, which is a title that means different things depending on who's using it. In his case, it meant he was helping the family navigate the development process, permits, contractors, timelines, while my firm handled the actual architectural work. I found out when I showed up to the first site meeting and Rowan was already in the room. He looked surprised for about half a second. Then he smiled and said, "Hey Tessa, small world." I sat down across from him and pretended I was fine with it. For the first few months, it worked. Our roles were genuinely separate. I designed, Rowan talked to contractors and managed the client relationship. He was good at the talking part, I'll give him that. He remembered people's names, asked about their kids, made everyone feel like they were his priority. The problem started with the eastern wall. The Halverson site had a preserved facade requirement on its eastern side, which meant the new structure had to integrate with a 1920s brick wall that couldn't be altered. My design threaded the new building around that wall in a way that required specific load calculations, the kind that needed a licensed structural engineer to sign off. Driscoll Plus Park has a structural consultant they work with regularly. His name is Philip Aldrin, and he's been licensed for 20 years and is meticulous in a way I appreciate. I submitted my drawings to Philip's office. He ran his calculations, he made 3 recommended modifications, I incorporated them, and he signed the structural documents with his PE stamp. That is how it is supposed to work. What I discovered in October, 6 months into the project, is that somewhere between Philip's signed documents and the final permit submission, a second set of drawings had been filed. They were close to Philip's but not identical. The load distribution on the eastern wall integration had been adjusted. And the PE stamp on those documents did not belong to Philip. It belonged to a license number I didn't recognize. I pulled it up in the state licensing database on a Thursday afternoon at my desk while rain hit the window. I sat very still for a moment after I saw what it was. Then I looked it up again, because I didn't want to believe the first result. The license number was registered to a structural engineer who had surrendered his license 6 years earlier due to a disciplinary action I won't get into. He was not licensed to practice in our state. He had not been licensed anywhere for years. Someone had filed a public safety document with a fraudulent engineering stamp. I knew who had access to the permit submission. I knew who had been managing that part of the process. I sat with that knowledge for 3 days before I said anything. I want to be honest about those 3 days, because I'm not proud of them. I kept thinking about my mother. I kept thinking about what this would do to the family, what it would mean at Sunday dinners I wasn't even going to, what my father would say. Rowan has made mistakes before, and someone has always managed to smooth it over, and some part of me, the part that had been trained to keep the peace, wondered if this could be one of those situations. It couldn't. I knew it couldn't. There were real people who would eventually use that building. A flawed structural calculation on an eastern load-bearing integration wasn't the rounding error. If it failed, it would fail in a way that mattered. On the 4th day, I called Elise. I didn't accuse Rowan directly on that call. I told her I'd found a discrepancy in the permit filing and I needed her to look at something. She came to my office within the hour, looked at what I'd pulled up, and got very quiet in the way that people get quiet when they're recalibrating everything they thought they understood about a situation. She called our firm's legal counsel that afternoon. I gave them everything I had. I answered every question. I told them exactly what I knew and when I knew it and how I found it. Rowan was removed from the project the following week. He was told it was a restructuring of project roles, which was a kindness he didn't deserve, but that Elise offered anyway because she is a more generous person than the situation required. The permit filing was flagged and corrected. Philip resubmitted the proper documents. The project continued correctly. No one called me about it afterward. Not Rowan. Not my mother. Not my father. I don't know for certain what Rowan told them. I know what I told no one. Which was everything, because it wasn't my story to take apart at the family dinner table. I reported what I had to the people I was supposed to report it to. I let the professional process do what it was designed to do. And then I went home and sat in my kitchen and felt like I had swallowed something that wouldn't digest. The gallery opening was in January. My mother had been working toward it for almost a year. A solo exhibition of her large format paintings, the kind she makes with layers of encaustic wax and oil that take months to cure. It was a real thing, a significant thing, and I was genuinely happy for her about it. I sent flowers. I bought a new dress. I showed up early enough to help with the last-minute arrangement adjustments, the kind of thing I've been doing at her gallery events since I was 19. My mother greeted me at the door with a hug and said, "You look tired, sweetheart." That was how she said hello. The gallery filled up. It was a good crowd. Collectors, artists, a few city council members, journalists from 2 local publications. Rowan arrived with his girlfriend, who I'd met once and found pleasant. He nodded at me from across the room. I nodded back. That was all. About an hour in, my mother gathered the room for a short speech. She's good at speeches. She thanked the gallery staff, her collector friends, a few people by name who had supported her work over the years. She thanked my father, who stood by the bar looking moved in the way he always looks at things my mother creates. She thanked Rowan. She said she was proud of how far he'd come, how much he'd built, how he carries our family's name forward with ambition. Then she introduced a woman named Patricia Halverson who had come to the opening. My mother had done a small painting commission for her the previous year, before the cultural center project started. Patricia was standing near the front of the room with her husband. Patricia said something kind about my mother's work. And then she looked around and said, almost as an aside, "Is Tessa here? I wanted to thank her in person." My mother said, "Oh, Tessa's here somewhere. She just helped out with some things tonight." Some things. Patricia turned toward the sound of her own name being said and found me near the back. She came directly toward me, bypassing the little knot of people between us, and she took my hand and said, "You saved that building. The whole eastern section. Philip told us what you found and what you did. I want you to know we know." The room was not silent. The room was doing what rooms do at gallery openings. Low conversations, the clink of glasses, someone laughing too loudly near the door. But in the small radius where I was standing, something shifted. My mother had heard. I could tell, because she had stopped talking and her expression had gone to the careful neutral she uses when she doesn't know what face to make. I didn't explain. I didn't make a speech. I squeezed Patricia's hand and said, "I'm glad the project came out the way it was meant to." That was all I said. Patricia had come with a folder. I didn't know this until she opened her bag and pulled it out. A slim manila folder with the Halverson Cultural Center letterhead on the cover. She said her family wanted to offer me a direct commission for the next phase of the project, an expansion of the outdoor pavilion, and she had brought a letter of intent. She handed it to me there in the gallery, in front of my mother and about 40 other people. I accepted it. I thanked her. I kept my voice steady. My mother came over about 10 minutes later, after Patricia had moved on to another conversation. She said quietly, "I didn't know about all of that." I said, "I know." She said, "You could have told me." I thought about the 3 days I had spent trying to decide whether to make that phone call to Elise. I thought about the months of silence afterward, the way no one had called, the way I had been quietly managing the weight of what I'd done and what it had cost. I said, "Would it have changed anything?" She didn't answer that. She touched my arm and said, "You should have been in that speech." "Yes," I said. "I should have." And that was the moment. Not loud. Not a confrontation. Just the two of us standing in her gallery, with her paintings on the walls around us, in the light I'd helped adjust, and the truth of it sitting between us like something that couldn't be moved. Rowan and I haven't talked since. I don't know what, if anything, came of the fraudulent filing, whether it stayed internal or went further. That part isn't mine to know. I made the report I was required to make. The rest belongs to the people whose job it is to handle it. My father called me a week after the gallery opening. He didn't say much. He said he heard the Halverson family was pleased with my work. I said they were. He said good. There was a pause that lasted a little too long, and then he said, "You always were the careful one." I think that was the closest he knew how to get to saying something more. I took the Halverson Pavilion commission. Elise gave me the lead on 2 new projects this quarter. I am building things, which is what I came here to do. My mother and I have coffee every few weeks now. We don't talk about Rowan or the gallery opening or what she said that night. We talk about her paintings and my projects, and sometimes we talk about nothing in particular, and that is, for now, enough. I drive past the Halverson Cultural Center on my way to work most mornings. The eastern wall is exactly where I calculated it should be. The light comes through the preserved facade windows at 9 in the morning at an angle I designed for, falling on the interior floor in a pattern that changes slightly with the seasons. I know that building. I know what it required and what it cost, and what it would have been without me. I don't need anyone else to know that. But when Patricia Halverson crossed a crowded room to tell me she did, I will not pretend that didn't matter. It did. It does. We don't stop needing to be seen just because we've learned to survive being invisible. What I know now is that I don't have to keep quiet to keep the peace. The peace that requires my silence isn't peace. It's just a version of the building my brother would have built. It looks fine from the outside, but the load is in the wrong place. And eventually, something gives. I chose to call Elise. I would choose it again. And I am learning, slowly, that being the careful one doesn't have to mean being the one who disappears. I've thought a lot about what it means to do the right thing when no one is watching, and more importantly, when no one is going to thank you for it. When I found that fraudulent PE stamp on the permit documents, I had every reason to stay quiet. Rowan is my brother. My mother adores him. My father built a version of himself inside Rowan that he's been protecting ever since. Saying something meant dismantling something my family had spent years constructing. I knew that. I sat with it for 3 days, and I won't pretend those 3 days were noble. They weren't. I was scared. But here's what I've come to understand. The fear of consequence is not the same as a reason to do nothing. I was scared of what truth would cost me and my family. I went ahead anyway. Not because I'm particularly brave, but because I understood that my silence had a cost too. And that cost would eventually be paid by people who had nothing to do with any of it. Real people, in a real building, on a real street. That's the thing about integrity that no one tells you when you're young. It's not a feeling, it's not something you have or don't have. It's a choice you make at a specific moment under specific pressure, and the version of yourself that exists afterward is built entirely on which way you went. I called Elise, I told her the truth, I handed over everything I had, and then I had to live inside my family's silence for months. No call from Rowan, nothing from my mother, nothing from my father except a carefully neutral conversation weeks later. That was the closest he could get to acknowledgement without actually arriving there. That silence was its own kind of answer. It told me exactly what I already suspected, that I had been asking the wrong people to see me for a very long time. Patricia Halverson crossed that gallery room and said my name out loud. She told me she knew what I'd done and that it mattered. That moment didn't fix anything. My mother still introduced me as someone who helped with the lighting. The speech still happened the way it happened. But something settled in me that night that I hadn't realized was unsettled. The understanding that being seen by the right people, even just one, is not nothing. It is in fact enough to keep going. What I want to say, if any of this means anything to you, is this: the work you do in the quiet, the problem you caught, the report you filed, the thing you did correctly when no one was looking and no one asked, it doesn't disappear just because no one acknowledges it. It lives in the structure. It holds the weight, whether or not your name is on it. And the people who look, who really look, will find it. Tessa made the call. The building stood. That's the whole story. Everything else is just the part that happens to you while you're waiting for the truth to settle where it belongs.